I sincerely can't even imagine this next topic, continuing. Because, I mean, we're talking about post-harvest losses here. On the average, Nigeria loses $9 billion. Make that naira, that's 3.5 trillion naira. That'll definitely take quite a chunk.
Ouch.
Off of our...
That's a whole lot of money.
Of our debts. Annually, that is it, to post-harvest waste. And that's according to...
In a country that is on the verge of famine and starvation
that's
and
groping
all that.
for food security and everything like that. So that's according to the FAO. Now, so Nigeria waste and post-harvest losses are two problems that continue to plague the agricultural sector in the nation. Reports say 1/3 of food, that's about 1.3 billion tons produced globally, worth about $1 trillion, is lost during post-harvest operations every year.
Wow.
Now, that's about 14%. The FAO puts food losses at around 14%.
Globally.
Yeah, beginning from the post-harvest stage to the end, excluding the retail stage, of course. So, and with the present challenges that we're having as a nation, the federal government talking with the United Nations and a number of other organizations all over the world about food security, the insecurity challenges, challenging food security and all of that. We have this conversation this morning on how we deal with post-harvest losses. Sulaiman Arigbabu joins us this morning. He's Executive Director, Header Resource Center. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And we also have Paul Ilona, who is Country Manager of Harvest Plus Nigeria. He joins us virtually. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ilona. Okay. So let me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let me begin with you, Mr. Arigbabu. First of all, have we even been able to track the reasons, the sources of these losses?
Oh, okay. So this statistics is speaking to post-harvest loss. That means after the farmer has done detailing and taking care of nurturing the crops, and then harvest it. What happens between that harvest point and the table and the market and all of that? Now, it's not a true value in this real sense of it, because when you look at the fact that, yes, $9 billion is lost to what we couldn't use, but how about the value that we would have gotten if we were able to convert that loss
So that's
to
the
other
loss
things
itself.
yes.
So the profits in the value chain is also lost.
Is lost. And the fact that then we needed to use other money to now import to augment for that loss.
That amount as
so
well.
So when you had that, the value is actually astronomical. So and unfortunately, this is something that's come with us for quite a while in Nigeria. However, I need us to also remember, because post-harvest loss is as a result of a number of things, our infrastructure deficit, our poor implementation of some of our policies to support farmers. But in 2020, something has happened to us, which is the COVID and the lockdown. And so,
making an already bad
many
situation
farmers
worse.
could not even harvest at all. And then, something that has been on our plates before that we didn't deal with has become a bigger monster, is now insecurity. So, and that has escalated since 2020 and it keeps escalating. So, for that reason as well, farmers are also additionally not able to go either to plant or to harvest. So, the problem is huge.
Okay, so let me take Mr. Ilona's opening comments on this matter as well. So I was thinking that maybe we already had a lead on the problems. Are there some of those issues that you think are responsible for this post-harvest loss that Mr. Arigbabu has not mentioned?
Yeah, good morning once again. I think the issue of post-harvest losses in Nigeria is very much hydra-headed. And if you look at the business environment in Nigeria, we always want to take advantage of gaps in the system. And by now we were hoping that the fact that, we're not able to utilize all our foods should have provided a great opportunity for some investors to come on board. If you look at the type of gaps we had in the past, in the telecommunications sector and other sectors, you saw how the business community came on board and plugged in money into the sector, and those gaps were to some extent eliminated. So the question would be, why is the business community in Nigeria not taking advantage of that gap to enhance their returns on investment? It then means that there are some challenges in the system. And until we remove those bottlenecks, we'll continue to talk about food insecurity, talk about food losses, and all that. Like I said, it's really hydra-headed. And this morning when I was discussing with a colleague, the point was for a consumer, for example, who bought Gari, say at 5,000 naira 3 years ago for 50 kg bag, and is buying the same Gari now for 26,000 naira. Yeah. Right? How much incentive does that actually become for an investor who wants to put money into the sector? To a large extent, I think that there are some basic things that we ought to have done to bring in investors into food processing so that the level of losses to farmers will drop. Unfortunately, we've not really done that very well. It's either these investors are not able to get NAFDAC numbers to ensure that their produce can get into the market. It's either they're not able to get supporting finance to encourage them going to that investment, or sometimes it is the fact that the investments are often at distance from the source of raw materials.
It's interesting, Mr. Ilona, that you mentioned all these things, but I'm particularly interested in that angle about the investor. And I think we have one joining us this morning. Pelumi Aribisala is co-founder and CEO of Cattle Foods Nigeria. Thanks for joining us this morning. How significant would you say the infrastructure challenge is, especially in the food sector?
Thank you very much. It's nice joining you from this part of the country this morning. I'll say that the infrastructural challenge in the food sector is a big one. There is a lot of infrastructural gap, and when you look at this gap, it's part of the contributing factors to the post-harvest loss that the country is experiencing. Nigeria is a country that produces a lot of raw materials in the agricultural sector. For instance, Nigeria is a country that produces cocoa but imports chocolate. Nigeria is a country that produces a lot of cassava, a lot of other crops like that, but then you have the finished goods, which is what gets to the consumer end, being imported. So, and when you also look at the insecurity, the power situation, the epileptic power situation in the country, all these factors have contributed to a lot of infrastructural gap. You find investors that are not really so keen or willing to really address this infrastructural gap in order to be able to arrest these post-harvest losses and other things that are driving food and nutrition insecurity in the country. So the infrastructural situation in the food sector is a very big one. It's a very big one.
All right, my apologies, Alero. Yeah. I just wanted to ask Mr. Arigbabu to look back for a bit. I remember, I think it was in the 90s, 80s, 90s, where we had what they call DIFRI, which was essentially to address the challenge of road infrastructure. Yeah. Directorate for Food, Roads and Rural Infrastructure. I'm wondering what happened to that initiative in your opinion. And I'm also aware, I'm pretty sure you are as well, that there is such a program as Rural Access Mobility Project, which is being supported by the World Bank and a French development agency. So I'm wondering, if we have all these going on, and I'm also aware that the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing is doing a lot of work in terms of trying to cut down poverty by working on so many roads to give access to farmers to shorten the trip between the farm and the table, just as you said earlier. If we have these plans and we still have these challenges, then what exactly is the problem?
Yeah, thank you. Earlier we talked. You initially asked what were those factors, contributing to post-harvest. It's like telling us the same problems of Nigeria, listing all those things that afflict Nigeria. But particularly to address the concern you just raised, is the fact that when you have a 100-volume problem that is increasing geometrically, and you are dealing with one volume or two, you are going to continue to have deficit. That's one. So we have a huge deficit that our meet-up plan is not measuring up. Secondly, it is not just to build new facilities or infrastructure. We also are not maintaining the ones that have been built. So it's like, oh, government has come to do it for you, and then government leaves it. We have given you your share of the national cake. Now, one, the road is not, these days, no longer as standard as used to be, except for specific rule, like, for instance, say, Apapa-Oshodi, the expressway, where government thinks, okay, let's give this to a private sector company to do. So you find most of the roads they do in the first place, the contracting process already compromise the standard that you're going to get. So a road that's supposed to, last for 20 years with, periodic maintenance, 2 years is broken down. Now, it's difficult for those people to call for government to come out because they are not going to be in government thinking for a while to come. So you have that. We have a lot of agencies. We have World Bank programs. We have state government's intervention in terms of road infrastructure. But it's not working because the level of integrity of the things we do these days is really, I've really taken a nosedive. So you have all of that problem on one side. Then you have the issue of logistics, haulage. So people who are to help you move from one hand, from the farm to the market. One, these are just people who, they can, the same way they will move waste material, they will move iron, will move plank, is the way they want to move food. It's the same kind of vehicle, which is not appropriate. So between farm and market, you have lost a percentage. Then when you move to market, they just dump. There's no facility to collect and store for the period it's going to be sold. So you have all of that, the layers of problems you are having at that level. So one, the people who are going to be moving, for instance, need a level of education. You need investors like Dr. Lona was talking about. You need investors who come into the space, understanding the problem, knowing the kind of facilities required, ready for the kind of investment. My only fear is that with the yes, it is good that private sector take advantage of the opportunities, but if we allow them to fill the entire value chain of providing those services, and government not doing its own bit of providing some basic infrastructure, they are going to load the costs on the product, such that what comes out at the other hand
for the consumer,
you rather eat from China than eat local.
Well, isn't it the same thing that's happening in the telecom sector?
In the telecom sector, yes, it is, but perhaps the craft and the need for telecoms is not like that for food.
You're right.
Okay, unfortunately.
Mr. Ilona, we talk about agric often on this program, and each time we touch on the aspects of storage and the value chain, and yet every single year, when tomatoes, for instance, are in season, we still hear that probably more is thrown away than is actually eaten by Nigerians. Is this rocket science? Can't something be done so that these problems are taken care of? Because if we spoke about them 10 years ago and we're still talking about them today, then there's something wrong.
I very much agree with you. This is not rocket science. It's just the fact that I would say, unlike in many other sectors, the agri sector has not enjoyed what I would call a very coordinated attention that will bring it to the level that it will truly add value to this nation. Yes, every year we talk about agriculture, but in fairness to our investors, I have a number of cases of investors who went into processing, and because of lack of raw materials, they're out of business. So at the same point, all of us are shouting that farmers are not able to supply raw materials, which will, to a large extent, lead to wastage. Investors in food processing are complaining that they don't have access to raw materials. It means we need to look inwards and truly understand what the challenges are. I was discussing with some of my colleagues in the banks, and the point then was, have you asked or have you tried to find out to what extent the support you are giving to an investor in the food processing sector, to what extent will that drive the value chain where he is? I want to find out why around Kano we don't have the government spurring, encouraging medium, small scale investment into the production of tomato puree. Why wouldn't we look at, say, Benue State, where a lot of fruits get produced, and we still have to move fruits from Benue State to the canning factory here in Ibadan? Why don't we build the whole sector of food processing into small enterprises that will come together to provide a mega solution? I think it's all about our strategy. Right, and I'll keep saying on this channel that when it comes to propounding theories, we are really very good at that. We have so many policies that should be supporting agriculture today, but then they've not been implemented to the point that they add value. And I want to defend investors in Nigeria to the extent that it's not the case that they don't want to put their money into the sector. It is the fact that the enabling environment that will ensure or guarantee the investment isn't just there. And even when it's there, it is not monitored. So if you ask me, I'll say it is time that both at the federal, state, and private sector level, that we do the walking and stop the talking. There are very simple approaches to reducing post-harvest losses. And one of them would be to see what we can do to bring the value chain, articulate the value chain, such that one component does not have to go through very high level logistic requirements. And that, unfortunately, is what they make our farmers to go through. I'm aware of one factory in Ijebu-Ososa that gets cassava raw materials from Kogi, from Kwara states. Why wouldn't you have losses? We're about to have losses, right? Now, the question would be, if Kogi is the hub for that raw material, why wouldn't we have put that factory there? Or why wouldn't we have put some other smaller scale factories that will help to reduce that drudgery and supply some near finished products to the other factories? So I think it's only a question of understanding what the value chain is and how we can work to make it a lot more efficient. And somebody made it very, very clear. I think the fact that the average Nigerian consumer welcomes everything, we end up pushing all our inefficiencies to them. I mentioned earlier on that the price of Gary 3 years ago was 5,000 naira for a 50 kg bag. Now it's 26,000 naira, and the consumers are not complaining, even though they are paying from their very meager resources. You look at salaries, minimum wage some 5-6 years ago, and it was above $100 for their wages. Now the same minimum wage has come below $50, and you have food prices that are hiking up.
Yeah.
How do we manage this? Because at the end of the day, the farmers produce and the demand isn't that high for them. And it will eventually lead to food wastages. So like I said, it's really hydra-headed. But I think it's really time that the relevant agencies, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Federal Ministry of Finance, I would say NAFDAC, which is really very, very central. A number of the investors I spoke with this year have complained that the inability to get permits, to get their NAFDAC numbers, have not encouraged them to invest in that sector. So how do we make that sector to become a lot more effective? Okay. What are the bottlenecks?
Okay. Mr. Aribisala, you are the CEO of, is it Carter Foods? What has been your experience as an investor in this business? And what exactly does Carter Foods do?
All right, thank you very much. Carter Food, let me start by saying Carter Food is an indigenous food processing company in Nigeria here that uses staple foods to address malnutrition. Carter Food uses bio-fortified staple foods, the vitamin A cassava, vitamin A maize, vitamin A sweet potato, to produce value-added food products to for all age groups towards addressing food and nutrition security challenges. As an investor in this food sector, I'll tell you that it's been a very, very tough Herculean task going up in the food sector. The food sector in Nigeria is faced with a lot of challenges, starting from access to affordable raw materials, access to quality raw materials, going to logistic problems. The food sector is such that you want to do everything by yourself, of which, in the real sense of it, you are not supposed to be the one to do everything in a situation where the environment is enabling enough. You're supposed to just focus on producing the food, production of quality and nutritious food, of taking raw materials from farmers, large-scale farmers, smallholder farmers, and different categories of farmers. There should be somebody that is into logistics that takes care of that. There should be somebody that is into marketing that takes care of that. But you find out that in the Nigeria food sector, the company, the CEO, the SME, the MSME, or even the large-scale companies are the ones that do this for themselves, because you cannot even guarantee that the food product that you have produced in your own facility gets to the consumer in the right state. So for you to be able to guarantee this, you have to be involved in everything. And when you are involved in production, you are involved in marketing, you are involved in logistics, you dissipate unnecessary energy.
Is that a problem, Mr. Aribisala, of policy or strategy, or is that of the program or the operational modes of the organization in question?
No, I don't think it has to do with the organization in question. I think it's more of the environment where these organizations function, where they work.
And this organizational environment, you're talking about what in particular?
For instance, the Nigerian food environment, the Nigerian environment. The environment is not enabling enough for actors in the food sector. And I give you an example. If you look at the very multinational food companies, you will realize that some of these companies even have to create their own logistic arms to be able to ensure that they move their food, their finished products efficiently to the consumers. And if you bring that to the SME, you will also realize that the SME that does not have access to that finance or fund, in quote, to play like the big players, have to also look at a way to have this their own logistic taken care of. Now, if the environment is enabling enough, there has to be some form of control. There has to be some form of organization. The food sector in Nigeria suffers from a lot of disorganization.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ariwabu, we have a few minutes left. But let me ask you this question. And you referenced it earlier when you say that we only calculate what we lose from the harvest himself. We do not also factor in the losses of the profits in the value chain. Now, economists will tell us that when we waste or lose food, it's not only the food that we lose. We also lose all of the things that went into the production of it. The water supply, the land, the power, capital invested, and all those things. Now, that poses a problem because Nigeria is a signatory to AFTA, Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement. And how much of a threat is this challenge to farmers and investors like Mr. Arisala in Africa, especially in the light of signing?
I will focus it on Nigeria, and it's a big problem. You know, I alluded earlier that if you allow the private sector to do everything along the food growing and distribution and processing, they have to load the money on the food. You know, Adire, our local fabric. You know, if you can't afford it, you can buy Adire prints from China, which is cheaper. And China is already doing gari.
I was shocked.
We are going to a situation where it will be easier to buy a China gari than to patronize the locally grown one. So you can start to paint the picture. We are going to a situation where, you know, we had a similar situation between maize growers and feed millers. The locally grown maize, because of the environment, because of all of this myriad of problems that we talked about, and we didn't even mention climate change, the locally grown maize is expensive. So government will say, close the border to maize so that local farmers and investors can make their money. But once that is done, feed millers, people in animal production will start to cry because they cannot afford the locally grown one. It's much, much expensive than the one that is coming from outside our shores.
Why?
Yes, because we make those who are doing it here, they are a government on their own. Just like you are a government in your house, you provide your water, your light, security, everything. If government don't do its own bit, and I mean federal, I mean state, I mean local government, if they don't do their own counterpart bit and then allow investors to ride on that and fill the gap, if we expect investors like Mr. Aribisala to do everything, it will affect the price of the things they are producing.
Are you saying government is the one responsible for food security or food insecurity in the country?
Oh, we will start with government. You can't blame me as a person. We will start with government. Then we will then nail it down to each and every one of us. And you know the challenge with this government is that communicating with citizens is not its best area. We know that there is a problem coming. We are adults. You need to let us know that there is going to be a challenge of food security based on the things I've analyzed earlier.
Okay.
You need to get us to be part of it now so that everybody can start to see how they can play to prevent the calamity from happening.
Now, just before we go, so I think we're about to start winding down. Mr. Ilona, if we had freight trains that could move food from the farms to the cities, would that make any difference? In one sentence.
That's one of the enabling environments that will be required to reduce the price of raw materials and ensure more ready access to our investors in the food sector. So my good friend Ariwabu has actually made the point. The government has to play its role, and it's all about ensuring that we have an enabling environment.
Okay.
But then we've not even looked at the road network. We are looking at trains. So I really think that the key thing is to ensure that we knock up the value chains, right? There's no point supporting an investor in food processing who is distanced away from his raw materials. So how can the government in implementing the finance and support to investors, how can the government in ensuring access to seed and all that bring all the key players together?
Okay.
As long as the food processor is 100 kilometers away from the raw materials, we have problems addressing raw material spoilage.
In parentheses, Mr. Elona, but trains will be cheaper than transporting the food on the roads, wouldn't it?
Trains will be cheaper.
Thank you very much.
I speak as a Nigerian.
Over to you.
Well, the issues you've raised, Mr. Elona, perhaps also points to that conversation by the Africa Development Bank, special and agro-industrial processing zones, and the various clusters all over the nation. Let's hope that helps. But we have to thank you very much for being a part of this conversation this morning. Paul Elona is country manager of Harvest Plus Nigeria. Pelumi Aribisala is CEO and co-founder of Kata Foods Nigeria, as well as Mr. Sulaiman Arigbabu, Executive Secretary, Header Resource Center. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Sunrise is back in a moment with another topic. Do stay with us.